All right, in this lecture, we're going to complete our exploration of Chapter 7, which is titled Computer and Network Security. And in particular, we're going to talk about or explore sections 7.4 and 7.5. So section 7.4 is titled Cybercrime and Cyber Attacks. And we know that the internet plays a vital role in the economic life of developed nations. Its effects include streamlining interactions between manufacturers and their suppliers, stimulating the creation of new companies, fostering the development of new business models, making online video conferencing much more affordable, and changing how people shop. And today there are more than 80 million .com domains, and annual e-commerce sales now exceed $1 trillion. So given the amount of money changing hands, so to speak, it's not surprising that organized crime is active on the internet. The economic importance of internet-based activities also makes internet infrastructure an attractive target for politically motivated attacks. So we're going to begin this section by reviewing 3 common internet-based attacks, and then we'll explore how these attacks have been used as a means to achieve criminal or political ends. All right, what is phishing and spear phishing? Well, that's with the phishing with a PH, even though it's pronounced like fishing for fish. A phishing attack is a large-scale effort to gain sensitive information from gullible computer users. An attacker sends out millions of email messages from a botnet, and then those messages inform the recipients that one of their accounts has been compromised and directs them to connect to a website to resolve the problem. Targeted users that click on the link encounter an imposter website designed to resemble the genuine e-commerce site. And then once on the site, they are asked for a login name, password, and other private information. And then the information collected by the imposter site can be used for identity theft. According to an industry study, there were at least 123,972 phishing attacks worldwide in the second half of 2014. An interesting development is the increase in phishing attacks on Chinese e-commerce sites, indicating the growing importance of the Chinese economy. Spear phishing is a variant of phishing in which the attacker selects email addresses that target a particular group of recipients or even one particular person. For example, an attacker may target elderly people judged to be more gullible or members of a group that have access to valuable information. An SQL injection is a method of attacking a database-driven web application that has improper security. The attacker will access the application like any other client of the application, but by inserting or injecting an SQL query into a text string from the client to the application. And then the attacker can, in this way, the attacker can trick the application into returning sensitive information. A denial of service attack, or a DOS attack, is an intentional action that's designed to prevent legitimate users from making use of a computer service. A DOS attack may involve unauthorized access to one or more computer systems, but the goal of a DOS attack is not to steal information. Instead, the aim of a DOS attack is to disrupt a computer server's ability to respond to its clients. Interfering with the normal use of computer services can result in significant harm. A company selling products and services over the internet may lose business, or a military organization may find its communications disrupted. A government or nonprofit organization may be unable to get its message out to the public. And then in a distributed denial of service attack, the attacker will rent access to a botnet from a bot herder. And then at the selected time, the command and control computer sends the appropriate instructions to the bots, which, which will launch their attack on the targeted system. On October 21st, 2016, a DDoS, a distributed denial of service attack against against the domain's name service provider DIN, caused Netflix, Twitter, Spotify, Reddit, PayPal, Pinterest, and media organizations such as CNN, Fox News, The Guardian, and the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal to become unreachable for several hours. DIN provides the important service of translating domain names into numerical IP addresses. So when DIN was swamped with bogus requests from an enormous botnet, legitimate requests could not be serviced. And what made the DDoS attack noteworthy was that it was launched by the Mirai botnet, which consists of malware-infected Internet of Things devices such as network routers, security cameras, and baby monitors. And the DDoS attack on DIN was particularly powerful. It was executed by as many as 100,000 devices. The Internet of Things devices are relatively easy for malicious actors to co-opt because many people install them without changing their passwords from the factory default settings. And some inexpensive devices come with no password protections at all. So as a result, millions of the Internet of Things devices may already be infected by malware. Criminal organizations have discovered that a great deal of money can be made from malware, so many of them have entered the arena, raising the stakes for corporations and individuals trying to protect their systems and sensitive information respectively. Right, and we'll give one example, although the book gives 4 examples in detail. So here's the example we'll focus on. It has to do with Blue Security. So the Israeli company Blue Security created a spam deterrent system for people tired of receiving unwanted email. And Blue Security sold the service to businesses, but individuals could protect their home computers for free. About 500,000 people signed up for this free service, and users loaded a bot called Blue Frog on their computers. The bot integrated with Yahoo Mail, Gmail, and Hotmail, checking incoming email messages for spam. When it discovered a spam message, the bot would contact a Blue Security server to determine the source of the email. Then the bot would send the spammer an opt-out message. Spammers who indiscriminately sent emails to millions of addresses started receiving hundreds of thousands of opt-out messages, disrupting their operations. 6 of the world's top 10 spammers agreed to use Blue Security's filtering software to remove Blue Frog users from their email lists. One spammer, nicknamed PharmaMaster, did not back down, however. He threatened Blue Frog users with messages such as this one. Unfortunately, unfortunately, due to the tactics used by Blue Security, you will end up receiving this message or other nonsensical spams 20 to 40 times more than you would normally, end quote. He followed through on his threats on May 1st, 2006 by sending Blue Frog users 10 to 20 times as much spam as they would normally receive. Then the next day, PharmaMaster went after Blue Security itself. He launched a massive DDoS attack from tens of thousands of bots targeting Blue Security servers. And this huge torrent of incoming messages disabled the Blue Frog service. So later DDoS attacks focused on other companies providing internet services to Blue Security. And then finally, the spammer targeted the businesses that paid for Blue Security services. When Blue Security realized it could not protect its business customers from DDoS attacks and virus-laced emails, it reluctantly discontinued its service. Quote, "We cannot take the responsibility for an ever-escalating cyber war through our continued operations," end quote, wrote Aaron Reshef, CEO of Blue Security. Quote, "We are discontinuing all of our anti-spam activities," end quote. Blue Security's decision to fight bots with bots while always controversial, was ultimately unsuccessful. A cyber attack is a computer-to-computer attack that undermines the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of a computer or information resident on it. Some nation states or terrorist organizations and allied groups are mounting politically motivated cyber attacks on the computer and network infrastructure of their opponents, and some of these efforts have caused major disruptions. And we'll give one example, although the book gives 7 in more detail. Georgia, not in the United States, Georgia, but the other Georgia. It's another former Soviet republic that gained independence in 1991. South Ossetia, which is a region of Georgia adjacent to Russia, gained de facto autonomy from Georgia after a brief war in 1991, though it continues to be recognized as part of Georgia by the international community. On August 7, 2008, after provocations by South Ossetian separatists, Georgia sent troops into South Ossetia. Russian forces entered South Ossetia on August 8th, and Russian and Georgian troops fought in South Ossetia for 4 days. A ceasefire between Georgia and Russia was signed a week later. The conflict between Georgia and Russia is notable because even before Russian troops had entered South Ossetia, the Georgian government suffered a series of DDoS attacks that affected its ability to communicate with the outside world. Multiple websites went down for hours. The Georgian government went so far as to switch some of its web hosting locations to the United States. American security experts said they had uncovered evidence of involvement by the Russian Business Network, which is a criminal gang located in St. Petersburg, but there was no clear link to the Russian military. Twitter service was unavailable worldwide for several hours on August 6, 2009, due to a massive DDoS attack. Max Kelly, the chief security officer of Facebook at the time, said the attack was an effort to silence a political blogger from the Republic of Georgia, citing as evidence the fact that 3 other sites used by the activists, including Facebook, LiveJournal, and Google, were also targets of DDoS attacks at the same time. No group took responsibility for the attacks, but some noted that on August 6, 2009, that was the first anniversary of the war between Georgia and Russia over South Ossetia. Okay, so this will be our final section, section 7.5, which is about online voting. So throughout chapter 7, we've seen many ways in which malefactors can breach the security of network computers, but the convenience and low cost of completing many tasks online are still significant benefits. So it should come as no surprise that an online solution is often proposed when there is a problem with a traditional process. And so in this section, we're going to evaluate a proposal to conduct elections over the internet. The 2000 presidential election was one of the closest contests in U.S. history. Florida was the pivotal state because without Florida's electoral votes, neither Democrat Al Gore nor Republican George W. Bush would have a majority of votes in the Electoral College. After a manual recount of the votes in 4 heavily Democratic counties, the Florida Secretary of State declared that Bush had received 2,912,790 votes to Gore's total of 2,912,253. So Bush's margin of victory was incredibly small, less than 2 votes out of every 10,000 votes cast. Most of these counties used a key punch voting machine in which voters select a candidate by using a stylus to poke out a hole in a card next to the candidate's name. But 2 voting irregularities were traced to the use of these machines. The first irregularity was that sometimes the stylus doesn't punch the hole cleanly, which leaves a tiny rectangular piece of card hanging by one or more corners. And votes with these hanging corners were called hanging chad, they're just typically not counted by automatic vote tabulators. So the manual recount focused on identifying ballots with hanging chad that ought to have been counted. The second irregularity was that some voters in Palm Beach County were confused by its butterfly ballot and mistakenly punched the hole corresponding to Reform Party candidate Pat Buchanan rather than the hole for Democratic candidate Al Gore. And this confusion may have cost Al Gore the votes he needed to win Florida. So the problems with the election in Florida led to a variety of actions to improve the reliability of voting systems in the United States. And many states replaced paper-based systems with direct recording electronic voting machines. So in this section, we're going to make a utilitarian evaluation of the morality of online voting by weighing its benefits and risks or costs. And the discussion assumes that online voting would be implemented via a web browser, though similar arguments could be made if another technology were employed. So here are some of the benefits of online voting, right? According to advocates of online voting, they say online voting would give people who ordinarily could not get to the polls the opportunity to cast a ballot from their homes. That's one benefit. Another benefit is votes cast via the internet could be counted much more quickly than votes cast on paper. And electronic votes would not have any of the ambiguity associated with physical votes, such as the hanging chad and erasures. And moreover, elections conducted online would cost less money than traditional elections. And then another benefit pointed to often is that online voting would eliminate the risk of somebody tampering with a ballot box containing physical votes. So while in most elections people vote for a single candidate, some elections allow a person to vote for multiple candidates. For example, a school board may have 3 vacancies, and voters may be asked to vote for 3 candidates. It would be easy to program the voting form to prevent people from accidentally overvoting or choosing too many candidates. Sometimes a long, complicated paper ballot results in undervoting as well, where a voter accidentally forgets to mark a candidate for a particular office. But a web form could be designed in multiple pages so that each page had the candidates for a single office. And the online voting could reduce undervoting in this way. So those are the major benefits of online voting, the case for it, if you will. The critics of online voting have pointed to numerous risks associated with casting ballots over the web, which we will summarize here. So the first one is that online voting is unfair because it gives an unfair advantage to those who are financially better off. I mean, it'll be easier for people with computers and internet connections at home to vote, but poorer households might not have one or both of those devices at home. The same system that authenticates the voter also records the ballot, and this makes it more difficult to preserve the privacy of the voter. Another risk is that online voting increases the opportunities for vote solicitation and vote selling. For example, suppose person X agrees to vote for candidate Y in return for getting a payment from Z. If person X votes from his personal computer, he could allow person Z to watch as he cast his vote for candidate Y, which would prove that he fulfilled his end of the bargain. This is much less likely to occur at an official polling place monitored by election officials. Another risk is that a website involves website hosting an election can become an obvious target for a DDoS attack. Unlike corporate websites, which have attracted the attention of teenage hackers, a national election website could attract the attention of foreign governments or terrorists trying to disrupt the electoral process. So what happens if the website is unavailable and people are not able to access it before the election deadline? That's another risk. Another risk is if voting is done from home computers, the security of the election depends on the security of these home computers. And there are several ways in which the security of home computers could be compromised, such as the following. A virus could change a person's vote without that person even suspecting what had happened. Or many people have physical access to other people's computers, which gives them the opportunity to install voter deceiving applications in the weeks leading up to the election. Alternatively, a rogue programmer or group of programmers within a software company could sneak in a vote tampering virus, or a backdoor Trojan lurking in a voter's computer could allow a person's vote to be observed by an outsider. A backdoor Trojan could even allow an outsider to cast a ballot in lieu of the rightful voter. And another risk is when an attacker could fool a user into thinking she was connected to the vote server when in actuality she was connected to a phony vote server controlled by the attacker. For example, the attacker could send an email telling voters to click on a link to reach the polling site, and when voters did so, they would be connected to the phony voting site. The attacker could ask for the voter's credentials and then use this information to connect to the real voter site and cast a vote for the candidates desired by the attacker. All right, so let's then look at online voting from a moral perspective, and we'll focus first on utilitarianism. So a utilitarian analysis would have to add up the positive and negative outcomes, particularly an act utilitarian, to determine whether allowing online voting is morally required. So you can recall from chapter 2, section 2.7.2, that not all outcomes have equal weight based on the probability of them occurring and their desirability, or how strongly we prefer them or disprefer them. And so, and of course, we have to factor in the number of people affected. So sometimes these sorts of calculations are relatively straightforward, particularly with toy models of scenarios, but in real life, that's not always the case. But we could try to apply it nonetheless to this online voting. Let's see what happens. So one of the benefits of online voting is that people who vote online would not have to travel to a polling place and wait in line. And if online voting replaced all the polling places in the United States, then this change would affect about 50% of adult Americans, because that's the proportion of adult Americans who actually vote. So then we can estimate or perform an estimate of the amount of time that the average voter spends traveling to a polling place, waiting in line, and traveling back. And we'll say that takes about an hour on average. And then the average annual salary in the United States is about $43,000, or about $21 per hour. And then from this, we can compute that the time savings associated with replacing polling places with online voting would be worth about $21 times 1/2 of the adult population, or about $10.50 for every adult. And now it's more difficult to come up with reasonable weights for other outcomes. For example, a risk of online voting is that a DDoS attack may prevent legitimate voters from casting their votes before the deadline. And while an election result that does not reflect the will of the voters is a great harm, the weight of this harm is reduced by 3 probabilities. First, the probability that someone would attempt a DDoS attack. Secondly, the probability that a DDoS attack would be successful. And thirdly, the probability that a successful DDoS attack would change the outcome of the election. So you would have to multiply the probability of all 3 of those events occurring in a causal chain. And even if the probability is high for each one of them, like 90%, 0.9 times 0.9 times 0.9 is significantly lower than 0.9. So experts could have vastly different estimates of these probabilities, though, allowing the scales of the utilitarian evaluations to tip one way or the other. And so it's one of the criticisms of utilitarianism then is that it's impractical for at least creatures such as us to have the requisite knowledge to be able to even use this normative system of ethics to come to any sort of conclusion. And even if we did, it seems like it sure takes a lot of time and effort that we might not always have as well. So we're sort of left even here with moral paralysis. We wouldn't know what to do because we have inadequate cognitive faculties and access to information. Okay, how about from a Kantian analysis? Well, a Kantian analysis of any voting system is going to focus on the principle that the will of each voter should be reflected in that voter's ballot. And so the integrity of each ballot is going to be paramount. So for this reason, every vote should leave a paper record so that in the event of a controversy, a recount can be held to ensure the correctness of the election result. Eliminating paper records in order to achieve the ends of saving time and money or boosting voter turnout is going to be wrong from a Kantian perspective unless there is some other way, some online way to ensure the correctness of the election result. And so perhaps that could be done with some sort of blockchain technology, right? And so this is where the ethics of information technology is, it's much more complicated than many of the ethical situations our ancestors faced. And so it's not clear that one person can do this, and we may need groups of experts to, instead of relying on one really smart person, we might need a whole group of really smart people with diverse areas of expertise to figure these types of things out. All right, so in conclusion, we've surveyed the potential benefits and risks of holding elections online, and we have examined the morality of online voting from a utilitarian and a Kantian point of view. So one question we might wonder is, are we holding computers up to too high a standard? I mean, after all, existing voting systems, even the paper-based ones, are imperfect, but there are two key differences between existing mechanical or electromechanical systems and this proposed online system. Existing systems are highly localized. A single person may be able to corrupt the election process at a few voting places, but it's impossible to taint the election results across an entire state. And a web-based election system would make it much easier for a single malicious person to taint the process on a wide scale. The second difference is that most current systems produce a paper record of the vote. Where paper records do not exist, there is a push to make them mandatory. And when all else fails, the hard copy can be consulted to try to discern the intent of the voters. But a web-based voting system would not have paper records verified by citizens as true representations of their votes. And I suppose the idea is that it's easier to tamper with web-based voting systems, and it's harder to trace that tampering and to know that it has occurred and control for it compared to the paper-based or mechanical or electromechanical methods. And there's already evidence of tampering in online elections, right? In April 2002, Vivendi Universal, was a Paris media conglomerate, held an online vote of its shareholders. Hackers caused ballots of some large shareholders to be counted as abstentions. And if a private election can draw the attention of a hacker, imagine how much more attractive, say, targeting a California election website would be, like for a governor. Any election system that relies upon the security of personal computers managed by ordinary citizens will be vulnerable to electoral fraud. And for this reason alone, there's a strong case to be made that a government should not allow online voting to be conducted in this way.